Welcome to the Published Author Podcast, where we help entrepreneurs learn how to write a book and leverage it to grow their business and make an impact. I'm your host, Josh Steimle. Today, my guest is John Kotter. John is a professor at the Harvard Business School and the author of 21 books, 12 of which have become bestsellers. John's books include A Sense of Urgency, The Heart of Change, and Leading Change. The last one, that was translated into 26 languages and was selected by Time magazine as one of the 25 most influential business management books ever written. His latest book, which I've got right here, is Change: How Organizations Achieve Hard-to-Imagine Results in Uncertain and Volatile Times, which is certainly applicable today as we're coming out of a global epidemic or pandemic. John, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Josh. It's a pleasure.
So I'm curious, most of us, when we're young kids, we don't say, hey, when I grow up, I want to be a Harvard business professor, or I want to study change in the field of management. How did you get into this and get interested? What's the story behind you becoming a professor and studying change and performance?
Well, I always enjoyed school. And when I was in high school, I decided that I wanted to be a physicist. And so I asked who was good at that, and somebody said MIT. So I applied, got in, and spent 4 wonderful years at MIT. It took me about 2 weeks to discover I wouldn't be a physicist, actually, that something else was going to be in my future. And when I was an undergraduate, I discovered labor economics and did a big project in which I set up interviews and drove from Boston down to North Carolina and studied the union movement down there as a representative of basically the union movement in the southeast part of the United States. Attended elections, interviewed a senator, all of this. I was 21 years old, and it was great fun. And I think that project alone convinced me that doing that kind of work, of digging into a topic up close, not in a library, but by talking to people, watching things, trying to find patterns that had practical implications that could help people, was fun. So I went off to business school after that with an interest in organizational psychology, and then at MIT, and then at Harvard for a doctorate in organizational behavior. Met some marvelous people along the way, and ended up doing a doctoral thesis on big city mayors from the 1960s. But the same kind of process, on the plane, off to the city, interviewing people, watching people. I mean, it was an extraordinary experience to think back, sitting next to Eric Johnson, who helped found Texas Instruments, which was one of the first semiconductor companies in the world, and they produced the first handheld device, electronic device, a little calculator. When he retired from being CEO, he ran for office as mayor of Dallas, won 2 times, and did some marvelous work. And just sitting and listening to the wisdom from this guy and the people around him, I remember sitting in the front pew of Martin Luther King Sr.'s church, talking to the senior Martin about his son and about the mayor who ran Atlanta during the 1960s, a small businessman, very modest guy by the name of Ivan Allen. Anyway, another wonderful experience, which I extended beyond the thesis and produced my first book with my thesis advisor called Mayors in Action. And I discovered it was not difficult to write the book, in the sense that it was just a fun, interesting exercise of trying to force myself to think more and more clearly and to communicate something that might have some practical relevance to life on Earth. And that experience has continued for decades now, book after book after book. I think the language has gotten, since my assistant and associate professor years, more straightforward and clearer, as I can picture the kind of people that I'm writing for, and I know what they will read and what they will find either not interesting, not useful, or unconsciously intimidating, which is what academics do all the time, unfortunately, and reduces the number of people who actually read their work. And along the way, I bumped into a German executive who had taken some of my work and who had created a little management exercise out of it that used emperor penguins in a colony in Antarctica. And he and I got together, and I tried to help him with his exercise. And then I finally decided this would make a great book. And we wrote a book. And my colleagues at Harvard, because they are generous people, tolerated that, even though I'm sure they thought I had gone off the deep end, because it was a parable. That parable was the #1 best-selling business book in Holland for a year and a quarter, in Germany for over a year. 3 stage plays were produced from that book.
That doesn't happen too often with business books, does it?
Never. Never. Videos, cartoon videos of this. I mean, it was an amazing experience. And I've written, because of that, I've wrote a second kind of parable, and have written 2 fiction books, which I have not published and may never publish. But they were fun exercises of letting your imagination go. So writing has been central to my life from an early age, not 10 years old, but certainly from 20. And it still is. And I find it a marvelous vehicle, even though today I am, besides a Harvard professor, I am a co-founder and executive chairman of a management consulting firm that is dedicated toward using this work to help organizations, and who, in my humble judgment, does a better job of that than any of the big consulting firms, because it's their specialty, and it's based on a lot of research and a lot of thinking and the like, and that's great fun too. But writing something that I think has a chance of being read by a broader audience and is useful to them in their professional lives, their personal lives, building better organizations, it's a real kick.
Well, thank you for that background. Going back to your first book, Mayors in Action, it's obvious that you enjoy writing, that you enjoy that process. It's fun for you. But publishing's another matter. How in the publishing world has changed a lot in the past few decades with Amazon and print on demand and everything. How did you get that book published? Did you pitch that idea? Did somebody come to you and say, we want you to write this book? But how did you get that published in that day?
What happened is a fellow, one of the senior members of the faculty, heard about this project and came to my thesis advisor and I and said that he knew of a series of books on urban cities, urban governance, basically, that was being edited by a relatively famous professor in political science at the University of Chicago. And he said, I think this is right in their domain and that they'd love it. And so we said, okay. And we sent a copy off to this guy. And he said, I'd really like to have it as a part of my series. And Wiley was the publisher, and that's how we got it. Publishing, I mean, you talk about an industry that's going through changes and the like. Publishing, remember, goes back to Gutenberg. I mean, this is arguably a 500-year-old industry, and the older an industry, the more it has baggage attached to it, and traditions that may be totally out of line or out of sync with the times. And I think it's both a very threatening and a very opportunity-rich environment for publishers and therefore for authors too. And I wouldn't predict for a second how it's going to evolve over the next 5 to 10 years, but it is going to evolve, and it'll be very interesting to see.
So I did notice that your latest book was published by Wiley as well. So have all of your books been published by the same publisher, by Wiley?
No, what I call my assistant and associate professor books were published by, each one was published by a different company. And then I fell into, I found an editor at the Free Press that I liked and who hung around Harvard Business School a lot. And I wrote 5 or 6 books for him. And then Harvard Business School Publishing, a publisher there, Carol Franco, got to know me, and I got to come to trust her and her judgment. And so I started doing books with her. And I've done 5 or 6 or 7 books with Harvard Business School Publishing. And then the oddball, the Penguin book, didn't quite fit into Harvard Business School Publishing's portfolio. So we found somebody that we thought could handle a more fiction-oriented book, which was St. Martin's. And this latest one, it was simply that an editor and a publisher at Wiley expressed great enthusiasm for the new book, and I decided, why not? They're very reputable old publisher, and these are 2 good people. Why not kind of cycle back to where we started?
Gotcha. So what are some of the changes that you've seen in the publishing industry over the years? And as you've worked with different publishers, what are some of the nuances you've seen that might be helpful for other first-time authors to understand?
Well, I think when somebody contacts me and is a first-time author and wants advice on publishing, I always have to think a little bit about how much to be straightforward with him or her, because you want to encourage people, obviously, if they've got any, but you need to give them some ways of thinking and some useful information that doesn't set them up for just disappointment after disappointment. I have found over the years that most authors hate publishers. They just have the publishing industry has become over my lifetime, so quite a few years, it has added less and less value to the publishing proposition as it's become more competitive as new forms of technology have come along for distributing information, and now as self-publishing, what used to be called self-publishing, is becoming more and more of a feasible option through Amazon, for example. Their margins are squeezed. It's tough as a business. And it's very easy for a new author to come in with expectations about what they're going to do with marketing and sales and editorial, et cetera, that just are out of line with the business model that most publishers have for new authors. The best way to go into a publishing agreement for a new author is with your expectations very, very, very low. I mean, I don't mean that cynically. I'm saying otherwise you just get frustrated and so easily, and that doesn't help. The key thing for a new author isn't even the publisher. It's getting a product done, writing something that you feel good about, and that meets some standard that's inside of you. Then today, you don't even need to necessarily go through the publishing gate of an official organization. You could go the Amazon gate of what used to be called self-publishing. I don't know what term is used most often these days. But if you're going with a publisher, lower your expectations. I have found, by and large, the people in publishing to be very nice people who actually cared about books, care about knowledge, and the best ones care deeply about the public service they think they are providing and getting information or entertainment out to a broader public. They see the place that they can play into democracy and encouraging innovation, et cetera, et cetera. So they're good people. They're just operating under tough circumstances.
For sure. So speaking of expectations, you've had 12 bestsellers, and that's not something most authors should expect to happen. But what was the first book that became a bestseller, and what were your thoughts when that happened? Was that a surprise to you? Was that how did that feel?
Well, it's a while ago, but I'm sure it felt great. And it was, I mean, my first, well, here we go. The mayor's book sold something like 2,015 copies, which for the series of books that it was a part of, edited by this professor from the University of Chicago, was about the average sales. And they had a business model that could at least break even, if not make a few bucks, with 2,000 total sales. And then every book thereafter started kind of going up until we hit the first bestseller, which may have been The General Managers, the first book I did with the Free Press, which ultimately sold, if you count the foreign editions and set for any figure I give you, China aside, because you can't believe those numbers, maybe 150,000 copies, which is pretty darn good. And I'm sure that felt terrific. And it also gives you more self-confidence that you're onto something, that this is not only personally pleasurable, but the numbers suggest that you're serving a growing clientele of people. And then you start getting back then, it would have been notes, letters, occasionally phone calls. Now, of course, it's emails from people who, and it's terrific feedback, because somebody that goes out of their way to send you a letter or an email, I mean, that says something, which also can be very motivating and self-reinforcing. And when you start hearing stories of how people used your material or how they think, it never ceases to amaze me how people will say, "Thank you, Mr. Kotter, Professor Kotter, Dr. Kotter, for making this happen." Well, I didn't make anything happen. They did it. And I usually send an email back these days now for years and years, pointing that out. You want to pat somebody on the back, get your arm behind your back and pat. I have served some catalytic role, which is terrific, and is very generous of you to thank me, but praise yourself. And I must admit, the Penguin book success globally did surprise me. I mean, I knew it had a chance of reaching a larger audience and doing some good, but I would have never predicted. It was a New York Times, a Wall Street Journal, a Business Week, a USA Today bestseller. And I know it sold, even though we didn't make a dime off of it, a huge number of copies in China, where I have been maybe on 5 or 6 occasions. I've done a one-day seminar in Shanghai or in Shenzhen or Hong Kong or Beijing. And yet on a couple of surveys that have been done over the years of who has most influenced Chinese management thought about running businesses, my name comes up in the top 10. And since I've not been there physically, making the total of my audiences is, over there is 1,000 or so. It has to come through books, and including a number of my books, but I'm sure Iceberg sold a lot of copies over there too. And that did surprise. The success of Iceberg really did surprise me. And it warms the heart.
So with all these books, where did all these ideas come from? Was it all from research projects that you were doing?
Yeah, formally it comes from research projects. That's where the stories, the data, et cetera. But it also is shaped by all of your experiences. So my teaching at Harvard, the courses I created there, the response I got from the MBAs and executive students more and more, who were sophisticated, middle-aged business people, what they responded to and what they didn't, stories they would tell me. So the research is at the center, but it's also influenced by other experiences, professional and personal, that help that give information, if you will, that the brain works on, I think, 24 hours a day in the back of your mind. For example, this latest book, the one that you showed them the cover of, Change, it officially started as an official research project about 4 years ago at the consulting company, not at Harvard. And we had a group of 5 of us at our Cambridge office that started meeting and talking about some new ideas from brain science and how they were informing us about human nature in a way that fit in some kind of interesting ways. some research that we'd done that had nothing to do with neurology, that was observational, and had to do with why some businesses or why some organizations, because we had public agencies too, were much more change efficient and effective than others. That group met on and off for a few years, and one person in particular said, "Okay, we've got enough. Let's write." And it just didn't feel right for me. I said, "Yeah, we've learned a lot, but we've got more we've got to learn." And then a year ago, December, one day I literally got up, went to my iPad, sat down, and started writing, and did a first draft of that book, the new book, in 2 months. And it just poured out. And I think something like that for me happens simply because my brain gets to the point where it says, "Okay, we figured out the basics, and we're ready to put them down on paper so we can be more systematic about working out the inconsistencies or the missing data or the questions that aren't quite answered yet." And so that's the way I think all of my books have been to some degree, although this one, the first draft, was much, much faster. It usually takes me a year to write a first draft. And the other thing I do is I have consistently shown more drafts of my books to colleagues and readers than is the norm in academia, where you pass it out to a few of your peers. The Iceberg book, before we turned it over to a publisher, we self-published it to see if it would sell. And then we edited it so that the published version by a mainline publisher, St. Martin's, was version, I think, 7. So 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. And every time we sent a batch out, we'd ask for feedback. And I have found, although when you get negative feedback, most of us cringe and kind of hide and hate that. But nevertheless, as a way to improve your thinking, your writing, your capacity to produce something that will be used and be useful to people, it's invaluable. Another comment for a first-time writer, getting the book out and then putting on a suit of armor so you don't, feel like you've been stabbed by your friends it will serve you well in the long term.
Got to develop a thick skin.
Mm-hmm.
Quick break here. Are you an entrepreneur? Do you want to write a book that will help you grow your business? Visit publishedauthor.com, where we have programs to fit every budget, programs that will help you write and publish your book in as little as 90 days, starting at just $39 per month. Or, if you're too busy to write your book, we'll interview you and then write and publish your book for you. Don't let the valuable knowledge and experience you have go to waste. Head on over to publishedauthor.com to get the help you need to become a published author. You've already waited long enough. Do it today. Now, back to the show. So what does your writing process look like when you're starting a book and writing it? Do you write the introduction? Do you create an outline? What does your process look like?
I think it has evolved over the years, but nevertheless, the basic method is start at the beginning. And if a kind of a table of contents, which is super rough, high-level outline, if you will, comes out, terrific. But if it doesn't, and your mind is into the beginning, doing a draft of a first chapter, I've done a number of books in which I spent the first month doing nothing but a draft and a redraft and a redraft of a first chapter. And when I got one that I was satisfied with, it began easier to go to chapter 2 and then to 3. And then if I get stuck at a certain point, I go back to the beginning again and see, okay, let's read through this and do a second draft of that chapter 1, 2, 3. And it's inevitably, at least for me, that gets me unstuck and drives me further into the book. And sometimes it literally is this cycle where the cycles get bigger. Chapters 1 and 2, chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, chapters 1 to 6, until you've got a draft of an entire book. I remind myself all the time that writing is more than writing. It's also part of an analysis, because it forces you to confront illogics, inconsistencies, things that quite don't hang together. And so I'm not afraid of throwing away something simply as I'm not throwing away my writing. I'm throwing away a piece of analysis that has been informative. Now with that clear in my head, I could set it aside and go back to writing itself. I don't think that, and I'm a morning writer, like a lot of people, and I couldn't write all day if I tried, because I just couldn't, and I've always had many other things to do, either teaching or helping with the consulting company. And a huge lesson that I've learned for myself, which was tough to accept at first, is if I struggle at a certain point, to stop. Because that's my brain telling me we haven't figured it out yet. So don't waste time writing stuff that might lead in a certain direction, and then you feel like you can't throw that away, but it's wrong, and wanting to edit the bad stuff, which you'll never edit into something that is good because it's just off in the wrong direction. But if you are a person who cares about getting things done and sitting with a project off to the side and not being able to work on it is tough at first. At least it was for me. But as a friend of mine once said, just keep reminding yourself your brain is working on it. And it may be, indeed, it'll make the great breakthrough while you're taking a shower. And if it does, you'll sit down and write. And he was, at least for me, correct.
So where do your books fit in with academia? I've heard that in some academic circles, writing books is perhaps looked down on a little bit because you're supposed to be writing journal articles, these professional academic articles that go in these academic publications. And you've written a lot of books, and a lot of other professors from the Harvard Business School especially seem to have written a lot of books. Is that different at the Harvard Business School than other business schools? Or is that across the board that a lot of business professors tend to write books?
Well, business schools and other professional schools have become over my career more like mainline academia, which has become more and more centered around the model of you write articles, they go into peer-reviewed journals, and the more articles in the better journals you produce is directly related to your chances of getting promoted and getting tenure and getting a full professorship. The problem with that for me, had I lived in that system, is that topics of great importance in the arena of organizational behavior, leadership, management, change, are not small topics. They're big, complex, difficult topics, and it's tough to say something convincingly and usefully in a short amount of space. It's much easier to say something that is useful, is convincing, and is solid at a book length. And Harvard Business School recognized that. And I recognized that when I was a doctoral student there. And I'm sure that's one of the reasons I wanted to try at least a career there. And there are elite institutions, even in their business schools, that, as you said, are expecting articles and look down on books because they aren't put through the same rigorous, quote, peer review process, which is a shame, again, for anybody that's trying to write about big, complex, softer, not hard science topics, and actually get it out to an audience and have some useful impact on this world.
Right. And that's the other side of it, is that these journal articles might be the result of a lot of complex, great research, but how many people read these in, quote unquote, the real world?
No, they're not read at all. They're read by a small number of specialists. And sometimes I suspect there is something in those articles because a lot of work was done, that if you could find it and write about it in the right way, it could actually have some impact of significance. In a lot of cases, I suspect that that's not true because they were so restricted in the scope of what they could study by the kind of the elite science model of what rigor means, that no matter what they found, it wouldn't be of particular interest because it doesn't have many implications for people who are in professions or running organizations. It's just too narrow.
I'd like to change course slightly here and talk about your management consulting firm, because you're also an entrepreneur. You have this business. Where did that come from? Was that something that grew out of your writing in the books and you were able to adapt that and say, hey, let's create a business around this? What's the story there?
Yeah, that's the way it happened. But it was a matter of, I had done everything at Harvard Business School except be the dean. I've been to the department head a couple of times, had created second-year courses, created our first-year required course, which I call LEAD, did all the major executive programs twice, and I was looking for something more to do, and the dean asked me to create a kind of a leadership institute at Harvard, which I did. And then after that, I wanted something more, and we went off and started experimenting with various things that didn't necessarily fit neatly inside an academic environment, like writing a parable. And in that exploration, doing videos, okay, in those explorations, it became clearer and clearer that if we wanted to extend reach and impact in a positive sense, we'd have to start a firm. And the most logical place to start that firm was in management consulting, because it was easy to take my material and turn it into a management consulting expertise and a process, which is what we did. The key there was just finding a few individuals, somebody who could run the firm, somebody who could be the lead consultant, et cetera. And that entrepreneurial journey, if you will, which we're still on, has been fascinating and very different from academia. And it's not only been incredibly rewarding when a client comes to you and says something like, as we have, I'm not a satisfied customer, I'm a fan. And you kind of say, yeah, I like that. I don't want satisfied customers. I want people who are so excited about the results they're getting, that we're helping with, that they are fans. And I've learned more about entrepreneurship, about the life cycle of businesses, and about change from the manager's point of view, not just from the observer's point of view, as a result of our venture. And watching people take this stuff with our help and taking some process, for example, I got an email just the end of last week from one of our people who got it from a client who said, this quote won't be exactly right, but it will be close. The process that we focused on used to take us 120 days to do X. And we thought we were kind of grinding away at 100. We had to move faster. That was too slow. And we knew that the world was changing, it's speeding up. And we were kind of going 120, work, 119, work, 118. And he said, we worked with your folks, and in 3 months, we cut the 120 down to 15. Now that's transformational, and it's what the world needs a lot more transformational change to deal with an incredibly fast-moving, complex, changing, volatile world. And without it, a lot of people suffer, which is just no good. So the entrepreneurial exercise has been very rewarding and very interesting. And I've managed to keep writing now with more and more of the research kind of coming from the actual consulting exercises, not just the kind of Harvard-ish research projects. Really cool.
Yeah, sounds like so much fun. So what are your plans for the future now? Do you have more books in the works? What are your plans with the management consulting firm, with academia? What's in the future for you?
I have drafts of something like 4 or 5 books in my iPad right now. And I know which one I want to work on next. And it focuses very much on the individual, an individual professional manager or anybody. because it's about life. And it's what I've learned from watching some really, truly outstanding leaders over the last 40 or 50 years of how they've done things. But I have no idea. And who knows, within the next month, I might pick up the iPad someday and start working on that. And after that, like I say, we've got lots of options. And the business, we'd have a number of new projects going on that I think could extend our capacity to help people broadly, including giving them a certificate or a micro credential through a university in the Kotter method, if you will, which based on the information that comes through our website, a lot of people would like, because they see that no matter what their job or no matter what their interests, including climate change and big social issues like that, they're coming to recognize that a huge problem is not just thinking up a good vision or a good product or a better set of technologies for handling energy. It's the change. It's institutional, organizational, individual change that's getting in the way. And hence, they want expertise in that. So I think there are a number of avenues that we could pursue with the consulting company that would be exciting and could have a significant impact. The firm, I don't remember who came up with it. I might have, but not necessarily. We talk about millions leading and billions benefiting as a kind of a vision for the world that is based on research. It's not hype. This isn't kind of guru hype. And we can play a larger role in actually making that and encouraging others to make that happen, which is very exciting. And that'll keep me busy until, I decide to sit in a hammock, which will be a long time from now.
I don't get the impression you're ever going to retire. It sounds like you'll do this the rest of your life.
That's a good bet.
Well, John, thank you so much for being with us here today on the show. Where's the best place for people to connect with you? A website or social media?
Yeah. Go to the company's website, because you can communicate to me directly through that. But more importantly, there's a lot of interesting free stuff on it, stories and articles and the like. And it's kottering.com. Just put Kotter in your browser, and the company will pop up along with lots of stuff on me. And you can do the same with YouTube, which has got a lot of videos, all of which are obviously free, and some of which are, I think, at least we've been told, very useful and very informative. But go to the company website, free stuff, useful way to get ideas, and an easy way to communicate directly to me. Just remember, it's Kotter, not Cotter.
Perfect. Thank you so much, John, for being with us here today on the Published Author Podcast.
It was fun, and thanks for inviting me.
If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to spread the word, please give us a 5-star rating review and tell your friends to subscribe too. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere else you listen to podcasts. And if you're an entrepreneur interested in writing and publishing a nonfiction book to grow your business and make an impact, visit publishedauthor.com for show notes for this podcast and other free resources.